Okay, what's up, fellas? I was talking to myself there for a minute. Thought I'd gone live, um, but I'm live now. So um, there we go. All right, how's everybody doing? I posted
Okay, what's up, fellas? I was
there.
talking to myself there for a minute.
Yeah. Okay. So how's everyone doing? I posted the link for the Zoom meeting in the chat and pinned that, so hopefully you guys can join and call in if you would like to. Ask me some questions, disagree with me, agree with me, whatever you want. This week, I am going to be talking about how the ancients cut stones, because that is, I think, the two biggest conspiracy driving factors when it comes to um, the ancients and people jumping to aliens or magic or high technology, what have you, is the ability to cut the stones and the ability to lift the stones. I somewhat addressed the ability to lift stones previously. I might go over some of that again today, but I'm going to be focusing on how they cut stones, um, or at least potentially cut stones, because no one knows, including myself. Before I get into that, just a quick note I wanted to make about the narrative of history. Um, I watched a few episodes of this show called Crapopolis. It's nothing special. This isn't a recommendation or an endorsement. I just noticed it's about the ancient Greeks, and they, every single episode, make a point to emphasize how they didn't have a way to keep time, or they didn't have a calendar, they didn't have this. They were, these primitive, stupid people who had no technology and no ability. It's completely untrue. Even within mainstream history, that's completely untrue. Yet that is the narrative that is presented to us. That is the narrative that we, the people, get, is overwhelmingly that everyone before us were these ooga booga cavemen, these savage idiots who had no knowledge of technology or medicine or anything else. And I actually, for the first time ever, saw someone else mention, it wasn't even in a history video, but I saw someone else mention the Peru skulls, um, and the Trapan skulls, the skulls with holes in them, are found all over the world, literally in every single continent and country, as far as I know, except for Antarctica. Um, and there's a few instances in which these skulls get really high survival rates, Peru being one of those places. Um, Over 90% survival rate, which is significantly higher than the survival rate we have today. And they were performing these surgeries in the exact same manner that we're doing them today, or the exact same usage, right? So we perform craniectomies or trepanning today when someone gets a skull fracture, they get their head bashed in, and you need to take out a chunk of the skull to remove pressure off of the brain. We, if I recall correctly, are able to do that at about 83% survival rate today. They were doing that at over 90% survival rate in ancient Peru. And they were performing it also on people who had experienced skull fractures, and were getting emergency surgery. Sorry. And no real point to that other than to emphasize just how far off the narrative reality is. So the narrative that were presented, they had zero understanding of medicine, they had zero understanding of science and anything really, and it's just not true. It's just not true. Some of that is actually the fault of archaeologists. There is some narrative following going on there, but to a much greater extent, it's just how things are presented in media and our classrooms. We're not receiving for, whatever reason, again, I have my speculations that I eventually will share. But they don't want us to know about our past for whatever reason, and they obfuscate it with Ooga Booga cavemen that just weren't the reality. People were just as smart, likely much smarter than us. We don't have the brain drain of, or they didn't have the brain drain of smartphones and stuff like that. And in fact, in the past, every iteration of technology, the fear has been that we would get dumber. So people go, oh, you stare at your smartphone, it's going to kill your attention span and make you dumber. And I agree with that. Before that, it was TVs. Before that, it was books. There was a large movement against writing and books because people thought that if you had to write things down instead of relying on your memory, it would make you dumber. And they probably were right, frankly. I mean, it's right about phones. It was probably right about TVs and books as well. So not only were people just as smart as us in the past, I think they were probably a good bit smarter, quite frankly. But anyways, let's get into the fun stuff. Let's get into why you're all here, if any of you are here. That is how the ancients cut stones. So I've got a few videos pulled up. This is the first one that came up, so I'll go ahead and play it. This is a couple of guys who are trying to cut granite using technology that is within the mainstream narrative for ancient Egypt. And they cut a very small piece of granite. I don't think they say exactly how long it takes them, but they mention that the other scientists who tried to recreate this did, I think it was 1 millimeter per hour, or maybe, I think it was 1 centimeter per hour. Yeah, there you go. So let's skip ahead to where they're actually doing this. They lay some clay out. It looks like they already have a little bit of a cut started there. Maybe my eyes are playing tricks on me, but it looks like they've already started the cut. I don't know if they necessarily started it with that copper tool. They're using water and lots of time and friction, and that's like a 1/2-inch piece of granite. They don't mention exactly how long this takes, but they're reapplying the clay. They're, taking turns. This wasn't a quick process. I'm going to assume they probably also got about 1 centimeter per hour. And this is over a 1 foot, granite piece, and they're cutting it a 1/2 inch. And this is taking 3 guys working, taking breaks. I mean, are they demonstrating that it is possible to cut granite this way using abrasive paste, copper tools, water, and a hell of a lot of time? Yes, they eventually, I'm skipping ahead to where they actually cut it in half. So they're going to cut a chunk off of it and then show you the edge here. Look at that. That's a decent looking cut. Not bad. It only took them 3 guys, however many hours, to get through 1/2 inch of granite that was 1 foot long. I don't think my camera. I don't think that's actually a sufficient explanation for, say, how the Serapeum boxes or all of the other sarcophagi or the many, many other things we see created with, there's massive cuts. One issue that is apparent with that technique is they only cut a piece that's a 1/2 inch thick. Could they have cut a piece that was 1 inch thick? Sure. 2 inches thick? Sure. But the longer that cut has to be, the deeper that cut has to be, the longer the blade has to be as well. And it still has to be thin too. or else you're removing a lot more material, meaning a lot more effort and work. You're already going through an extreme amount of work. The point being is there are cuts over in Elephantine Island. Ben has a lot of this footage on his channel of massive circular saws. I mean, like 26-foot diameter, I believe, is what I'm recalling off the top of my head. They measured because it's a partial cut, right? But it broke off, and you can see the curve of where the saw was eating into this granite, and they measured it to be, I think, 26 feet. And even if not that, there are deep cuts made all over. You can't do that with copper. That copper is too weak at a certain point, or even if you can, that's just a lot of copper. Now you're making these massive saw blades out of copper. I don't know. It doesn't add up to me, and I don't believe it explains in things like interior 90-degree corners. You have perfectly flat surfaces on the outside. Great. That's not that hard to accomplish. I mean, it is very hard. It's a lot of hard work, but it's not all that technically hard, right? It's a pretty simple, straightforward process to get a cut on the outside and make it flat. Doing that on the inside of a box becomes exponentially more difficult. Doing that on the flat surface of the bottom of the box, even more difficult than doing it on the sides. And then matching all of that in an incredibly tight 90-degree corner. Unlike this, where there's people going, look, we can cut granite with these tools. As far as I know, no one has ever even attempted to do something like an interior 90-degree corner with these tools. I've seen no explanation for it. It sure seems like nonsense to me. So yeah, I don't think copper tools explain all of the granite work we see in ancient Egypt. However, here's a guy carving.
A lot of you.
Not sure if this is marble or sandstone or what exactly this is. It's just a little logo, but it's showing, not a 90-degree interior angle, but it's showing interior angles. Oh, that's right. My YouTube doesn't work on my computer. I can't watch shorts on my computer. I forgot about that. And a lot of the videos I have pulled up were shorts. So let me try and find maybe not a short. So this guy is a young guy doing stonemasonry. And I think a lot of people have never seen this. I think a lot of the people who jump to conspiracy, and my computer doesn't want to load either, they don't even understand how this is done in softer stones like sandstone, which I think is what he's working with here. And so this is great because this shows compound surfaces. You hear Ben talking about how, it's so impossible to make these consistent compound surfaces. And here's a guy doing it with hand tools quite easily. So a bit of contrast to what I was just saying, how I don't buy the mainstream narrative for all this granite work with these copper tools. But then I'm also going, hey, look, in other stones, they could have done this pretty reasonably with copper tools. Certainly would be a lot easier with iron tools, but with stone tools, with copper tools, it's definitely not impossible. Here's another example of this guy working some stone. And yeah, doing compound, complex curves. Like Ben really likes to emphasize the difficulty and the impossibleness of creating a consistent curve without high technology. And this guy kind of destroys that whole argument quite effectively. And he actually has a lot of shorts where he's playing. He has some clips, I believe, of Ben saying things like that. and him doing this in the background. And as fantastic of a rebuttal as this video and this guy provides, he is working very soft stones here. He's working sandstone, he's working marble, he's working 3s on hardness scales, not 8s and 9s like the ancient Egyptians were. The difference between carving granite and the difference between carving marble is kind of like the difference between carving clay and carving marble. It is a massive, massive gap. I like that he's actually showing some of the polishing in this one. If I've mentioned this fact in almost every single one of my videos because I think it really emphasizes the point I was just making, which is that the Roman Empire lost the ability, they had the ability to carve granite, and then they lost it for about 1,200 years. When the basilica was created, they had to reuse granite columns from over 1,000 years ago because they couldn't form them today. They could make all of the rest of this basilica. They could work stone fantastically. In the age of the statue of David, when they had the best marble work of all of history, pretty much, is I think people regard, maybe it's not, but it's at least I think regarded that way. They could do so much with marble, create so many incredible things. They could not work granite. They couldn't work granite. They could not cut it. They could not shape it. It was beyond them. So as beautiful as this guy's work is, as fantastic of a job he does at debunking the compound curves and right angles and stuff like that argument, it's only valid for soft stones. It does not translate to... Now, if he wants to come out with a video of him doing this to granite, that would be fantastic, and it would really shut a lot of people up, myself included. But I've never seen it. I've never seen it. I see the very simple kind of work that I showed in the earlier video where they cut a straight line 1/2 inch deep, but nothing like this in granite. So really cool videos. I think these are great to watch. I enjoy watching this. It's just kind of visually satisfying, but it's also really cool to see how the ancients were also likely doing this. I mean, they might have had slightly different tools using stones and copper, but the same process, I would imagine. A hammer and a chisel and some expertise and some time. So to the quick summary, I guess, is compound surfaces, right angles, definitely nothing impossible about that with a hand tool. He was demonstrating that very well, but it doesn't translate to the ability to do that with granite, especially not with copper tools. And actually, let me pull up another video real quick. Give me just a second here, folks. To show a bit of the difference, and this is not going to be a perfect translation because these are power tools that this guy is using, but this is someone working granite in our modern times. He's making a tub, if my internet will function. Rather simple. He has a really hard time moving this stone. You can see the size of this stone, and you can compare it to some of the megaliths you see in Egypt and all over the world. It's not that big compared to a lot of the stones used in the ancient world. And this guy really did, I skipped ahead too far, I guess, for the moving part. But he had, you know, that big piece of equipment, and still was here. He's struggling to move it here. You know, he's having a hard time moving it. So it is really impressive that they were able to move such big stones in past. But not at all impossible, just a little ingenuity. So here he is using power tools. It's sped up. I actually want to rewind a little bit and show the first cuts that he makes. Here we go. So he starts with a full boulder. And just to show you the process, because despite the tools being radically different, I imagine the process was largely the same for hollowing out a stone like this, as you make a lot of cuts parallel like this, and then you break off the pieces in the middle, and you do this over and over and over again until you've roughly cut out the shape, and then you have to do finer cuts. You can see that they're speeding up the video. He's using a pretty serious power tool there, and it's still slow work. Imagine making all of those cuts. Imagine what that guy was doing in the first video, that little half-inch cut he was making with the copper tool. Imagine hollowing out this entire boulder using that technique. It would take a lifetime. One piece of granite would quite literally take a lifetime. I'm not even 100% sure one lifetime would cut it to hollow out this entire boulder using those copper saws that scientist was demonstrating how it was feasible. So this goes on for a while. They keep working it. On the interior, there's no 90-degree angles. He just made a roughly rounded shape. I'm just trying to get a good look at the interior here, but I'm struggling to find a good spot in this video. So you can see it's all rounded in there, which is a lot easier to cut than at least on the interior, much easier to cut like that than a straight line, or certainly easier than an interior 90-degree corner. Yeah, I guess really the point I wanted to make was in the beginning of this video, which is just showing how this is done and then trying to imagine doing this with those copper tools. It's kind of like trying to imagine a Googleplex. Like, my mind actually struggles to imagine it. It's such an insane undertaking. I really struggle to imagine doing this in copper tools, even theoretically. So yeah, working granite is an entirely different beast than working other stones, and you see a lot of granite work in ancient Egypt and the rest of the world. Excuse me. What was the next point I wanted to make? Right. So moving on a bit from how they cut stones a little bit, I wanted to address all the people who say, we can't build these things today. Well, right there was an example of someone working granite today. Not the most detailed work, not the most impressive in that regard, but we certainly are capable of working granite today. We certainly are capable of building big, impressive structures today. And if anyone recognized my thumbnail, a little bit of clickbait there, because this was just finished. This Hindu temple in New Jersey, the world's second largest Hindu temple behind, the name is not in my head right now. It's going to take me too long to think of it. But the world's second largest Hindu temple just finished construction. It just opened. It has 10,000 statues. I'm pretty sure that it is not made out of granite. I think it's marble, which is significantly easier to work with. I don't know. They might have some granite in there. But you can see it is, just like the ancient Indian temples, ridiculously ornate. I mean, 10,000 statues in this temple. I trying to get some bigger images here, failing to do so. You can see the level of detail going on in this, and this is akin to the level of detail you see in ancient Egyptian temples as well, including ancient Egyptian temples that were carved out of granite. So this isn't granite. So could we do this in granite today? I would argue we could. I would argue that we never would because of the unbelievable amount of time and labor that would be required, but we do have certainly tools capable of doing this. If you wanted to make, an individual pillar like this out of granite, it would certainly be possible. Why not do it 10,000 more times and make this whole temple? Because it's too much work, but it's not impossible, is the point. And building grand structures like this also clearly isn't impossible. This one was just finished very, very recently. I don't know the exact date, but extremely recently. Yeah, and this is exactly what they were doing thousands of years ago with Hindu temples. Or even less than 1,000 years ago. A lot of the most impressive Hindu temples and granite temples are dated between 1,500 years ago and 700 years ago. As recently as 700 years ago, they were doing this with no power tools, just hand tools, iron. They did have iron 700 years ago, but still just chisels is supposedly how this was done. So let me try and... I feel like I keep contradicting myself, and in my own head, I'm not, because I know what I'm talking about, but I feel like I've done a very poor job of delineating all of my different points here. So, in India, 1,500, 700 years ago, they supposedly did not have lathes. They did not have a lot of things. I don't want to misspeak and say something, but they supposedly didn't have the lathe or many other tools, and yet they were creating not only temples just like that, but temples just like that made out of granite. Angkor Wat is the biggest one, and that is, I believe, granite and basalt. And it's not only incredibly intricate like that, but just chock full of like interior 90-degree corners and some interesting features in the stone. And I don't remember the date on Angkor Wat. I believe it's over 1,000 years old. But the argument that from mainstream history is that these people, they didn't have things like lathes. I don't think they had the drill. Not 100% sure on that. And this was all just done with hand chisels. I showed on Low Value Mail and at least once on this show, an example of some of the ridiculously intricate granite work that's done. There was like a little circle like this that had a god tearing out some other god's intestines and stuff. And they're these granite ropes that are as fine as I have, finer than this, my cord here, my charging cord, more fine than that. These granite intestine ropes were carved and intertwined with each other. I just struggle to see that being done even with iron hand chisels. I think they did have some degree of technology. On the flip side, it is really hard to reconcile all of this stuff because there just are contradictions. There just are contradictions, and I dedicated an episode to that where I mentioned how like we have, homeless people with smartphones, right? That's a contradiction in our time. It wouldn't make sense, most likely, archaeologically. You look back in our time, 5,000 years in the future, and you find homeless encampments where people are obviously, not doing well, but they have smartphones. Doesn't add up. So in ancient Egypt, it also doesn't add up because you do see this work that's clearly possible through the technology they had. That guy carving those marble blocks demonstrated that compound curves, straight lines, right angles are all very, very possible. He's 20 years old. So at most, he's been doing this for 20 years, right? Obviously, he's been doing it a lot less than 20 years. So a few years of experience, you can make these things that many people argue is impossible with hand tools. It's clearly not impossible. But then you contrast that with the granite work, and it does immediately become impossible with the copper tools that they supposedly had at the time, or even just pounding stones, because some of these predate the Copper Age. Some of this work predates the Copper Age. It immediately becomes impossible. You clearly do have a higher degree of technology involved in that. And then potentially an even higher degree of technology involved in the vases that we see in ancient Egypt, which show a level of precision that is hard to explain. I really like the channel ClickSpring, not only for his groundbreaking work on the Antikythera mechanism, but also I just had my mind blown by watching that channel because he uses techniques that would have been available to the ancient Greeks and recreates the Antikythera mechanism, and it showed me the level of precision and the level of perfection that is possible without any of this modern technology. I never would have been able to imagine it. I never would have been able to come up with the things he was doing on my own. It was totally blew my mind. But you absolutely can create incredibly precise things with primitive methods. So I really don't think that those vases require anything like a CNC machine or lasers or anything like that to reach the level of perfection that they have reached. But it is very, very obviously not made with hand tools. Or I guess you could argue I don't know what. No, they're not made with hand tools. They made more complex tools. So yeah, I think that covers what I wanted to cover for the most part about cutting stone. The massive difference between granite and other stones. Rome losing the ability to cut granite for over 1,200 years. You saw that Indian temple, super impressive. We're still building super impressive things today, but not out of granite, because I think that cost around $100 million. I think it was like $96 million, or it might have been $960 million. Obviously, that's a bit of a difference. Would have cost way, way, way more if that was granite, but it would have been possible. I've shown this video on my channel before, but the final thought, or actually, I don't know if I've mentioned this video. I don't know if I've actually shown it. So I will show this video as my final thought, which demonstrates how stones can be moved. Where are my liked videos? There we go. Give me a second here. Slow internet, slow me. A lot of low value mail in my man, my internet is struggling. Okay. Should be right here. This guy demonstrated how the coral castle was constructed. The Coral Castle, which I believe was around 1910. And he managed to find some actual footage of Edward Lee Skelton, who was a 90-pound guy, 95-pound guy, 5 feet tall. And you see him lifting very large stones there all by himself, rolling them using winches. And yes, ancient Egypt supposedly didn't have this technology. Ancient India supposedly didn't have this technology. I think that's absolutely nonsense. They definitely did. It just, or if not that exact technology, they clearly understood the principles of leverage and mechanics very well. And that is all that's really needed in order to lift heavy things. You can lift really, really big objects, really, really heavy things with some simple leverage and mechanics. I mean, he's using wood here, which Egyptians would have had access to, especially the most ancient Egyptians. The Sahara wasn't a pure desert back then. They still had trees, they still had greenery. It took quite a while for all of that to disappear. And even if they had to import wood, they definitely were trading with other nations and could have done that. So this guy, and if I can, this actually made national news like 2 decades ago, 15 years ago or so. Yeah, this guy. This isn't actually his video, so I don't know. Hopefully it... Wally Wallington, I think that's the guy. So this guy, Wally Wallington, he made national news because in his backyard he's moving these giant stones, and he's came up with several different techniques. You see one of rolling square blocks there very easily. He's doing it with a bigger square block. He came up with like a dozen different techniques to move stones and also oddly shaped objects, because you might be going, oh, these are all square. No, he moves a whole building across his yard by himself. You know what? I think that's fine. I don't need zoom for the rest of this video. I mean, he's not struggling here. He's doing all of this without even breaking a sweat. And I didn't see any pulleys. I didn't see any winches there. You know, this is all things that were entirely possible in ancient Egypt or anywhere else. So, you know, like I said, when I watched ClickSpring, and I just had my mind blown because the levels of precision that he was achieving with quote-unquote primitive tools was something that I thought impossible. I think a lot of people thought something like this was impossible. And yet here's a guy moving massive, many ton stones by himself with ease. So all of this stuff in the ancient past, it wasn't done with the super primitive copper tools that the mainstream suggests. And these people weren't ooga booga cavemen who didn't understand science and medicine and technology. They were incredibly intelligent. They were incredibly resourceful. I don't know that what we're seeing necessarily requires high technology in the way that people think of it, you know, like modern technology, digital technology, lasers. I don't think any of that's necessary. I can't tell you what technology was used because I'm not as smart as those ancient people. If I was, I could come up with the methods, but I'm not. But I think it's a mistake to jump to, you know, they had digital lasers and all that stuff. I imagine they were using techniques more akin to this. They were doing things, again, in a primitive way, air quotes, because I don't see this as primitive just because they're not using hydraulics. I think this is pretty ingenious. So that's the end of the episode, folks. Hopefully, you guys got something out of it. Hopefully, someone enjoyed it. And wow, I really failed on following the chat this time. I am sorry about that. If anyone wants to call in, I'll reopen the Zoom sesh. I would welcome a call. And very sorry for ignoring the chat. Totally my bad. But thank you guys. That's awesome to see all those comments. I will definitely go back and read those later. And yeah, hope you guys enjoyed it. And I will see you guys next week, Sunday at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for another episode of rewriting history with the Goob. I'm sorry, Eric. I feel like an asshole. I appreciate you taking the time to, watch me and to comment. It really does mean a lot. Throw a like if you're not too hurt by it. But see you guys next week. Thank you. Oh, that's right. I always forget that I minimized this way down here. And then I always struggle to pull it back up. Oh boy. I can't even see it at all. Let's see here. Precision. Nope. Shit. I might not be able to end this stream. What have I done to myself? All right, can I fully hide the taskbar? I think I can move the taskbar. There we go. I'm figuring it out. All right, see ya.